In the last years of his life, Leonardo da Vinci carried 3 paintings with him wherever he went. He had been carrying them for years. He had been working on them intermittently for years. The Mona Lisa he had begun in Florence around 1503 and was still adjusting in France in 1517, 14 years later, when a papal envoy visited him and reported that he could no longer hold a brush steadily with his right hand, but was still directing the work with his left. The St. John the Baptist he had been refining for the better part of a decade. The St. Anne had been in progress for nearly as long. He never finished them. When he died in 1919 at 67 in a manor house in Amboise provided by the French king who had invited him to spend his final years in comfort, these 3 paintings were still in his studio. He left them in his will to his assistant, Francesco Melzi. They were not abandoned, they were not forgotten. They were works in progress at the moment of his death, which is to say they were, like almost everything Leonardo produced, incomplete. The notebooks are more incomplete still. 10,000 pages survive out of an estimated total of 28,000. They contain anatomical drawings of a precision that would not be matched for another century. They contain designs for flying machines, hydraulic devices, weapons, bridges, musical instruments, theatrical machinery. They contain observations about the movement of water that are still cited by fluid dynamicists. They contain grocery lists, financial accounts, riddles, fables, the beginnings of treatises on painting and anatomy and geology and botany that he never completed. They contain the record of a mind that was interested in everything, that could not stop asking questions, that generated investigations faster than a single life could possibly complete them, and that was, for this reason, constantly leaving things unfinished. The world has spent 500 years calling Leonardo a genius, and 500 years marveling at how much he left undone. What it has been slower to notice is that the leaving undone was not a failure of the genius, it was the expression of it. That the life organized around the inexhaustible question, the life that cannot stop asking, cannot stop investigating, cannot stop being interested in everything at the cost of finishing anything, is not the failed version of the life that finishes. It is a different kind of life entirely. One that the culture that celebrates completion has never quite learned to value on its own terms. There is a specific form of self-judgment that most curious, wide-ranging, genuinely interested people in midlife carry, and that the culture around them has been reinforcing for decades. The judgment that the unfinished is the unaccomplished, that the project begun and not completed is evidence of a flaw, a lack of discipline, a deficiency of follow-through, an inability to commit that explains, in retrospect, the trail of half-finished things that stretches behind the person who is taking the inventory. The notebooks started and abandoned, the skills acquired and not pursued, the interests that burned brightly for a season and then gave way to the next thing, leaving behind the specific low-grade guilt of a person who wonders whether the pattern of beginning without finishing is a character defect wearing the costume of curiosity. The productivity culture has an answer to this. The answer involves systems, habit trackers, project management frameworks, accountability structures designed to take the person who begins many things and force them into completion. The answer assumes that the beginning without finishing is a problem to be solved, that the goal is to transform the Leonardo, the mind that generates investigations faster than a single life can complete, into someone who finishes what they start. Leonardo would not recognize this as an improvement, not because completion is worthless. He understood the value of completion, and there is evidence that the unfinished paintings haunted him in ways his notebooks occasionally acknowledge, but because the assumption behind the prescription is wrong, the assumption that the measure of a life is what it produces. that the investigations that did not result in treatises, the paintings that were not delivered, the machines that were built in notebooks but never in wood and metal, are the evidence of failure, rather than the record of a mind that was genuinely inexhaustibly alive to the world. He asked more questions than he answered. He left more things unfinished than he completed. And what he left behind, the notebooks, the paintings he did finish, the investigations that fed into everything he touched, is the most extraordinary record of a single human mind's encounter with the world that Western civilization has produced, not despite the unfinished, because of the quality of attention that the asking produced, the attention that could not stop, that would not settle, that moved through the world the way the water he spent years studying moves, finding every channel, filling every space, going wherever there was room to go.
Leonardo Piero da Vinci was born in 1452 in the hill town of Vinci, in Tuscany, the illegitimate son of a Florentine notary named Ser Piero and a peasant woman named Caterina. The illegitimacy mattered. It closed certain professions to him, including the notarial career his father had followed, and certain guild memberships that regulated access to the most prestigious artistic commissions. It also freed him in ways that the legitimate son with the clear career path might not have been freed, to become the particular kind of person his curiosity required. He was apprenticed, probably around 1466, to Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the leading artists and craftsmen of Florence. Verrocchio's workshop was not simply a painting studio. It was a laboratory, a place where art and engineering and mathematics and the physical properties of materials intersected in the daily practical work of making things. Leonardo absorbed everything. He was a better painter than his master within a few years, reportedly causing Verrocchio to give up painting himself. He was also, from the beginning, something that pure painters are not usually required to be, a scientist. He looked at everything with the specific, undeflectable, slightly alarming quality of attention that would define his life. He dissected corpses, dozens of them, over decades in the hospitals of Florence and Milan and Rome, because he wanted to understand how the body worked from the inside, and because the understanding fed back into the painting in ways visible in every figure he drew. He studied birds in flight because he wanted to build a machine that flew, and because the movement of wings through air was interesting to him independently of any practical application. He studied water because he was fascinated by water, by the patterns it made, the forces it expressed, the way it moved around obstacles, and because the fascination was, in itself, sufficient reason. He moved between patrons and cities throughout his career, Florence to Milan, where he spent nearly 20 years in the service of Ludovico Sforza and produced The Last Supper, back to Florence, to Venice briefly, to Rome, where the work was slower and the papal patronage less generous than he had hoped. Finally, to France, invited by Francis I, where he spent the last 3 years of his life in the manor house at Amboise with the 3 unfinished paintings and the notebooks. The unfinished list is long. The Adoration of the Magi, commissioned in 1881, he left Florence the following year without completing it, and it remained an underpainting. The Battle of Anghiari, a massive fresco in the Palazzo della Signoria. He abandoned it in 1506, apparently dissatisfied with an experimental technique that was failing. The Sforza horse, a monumental bronze equestrian statue planned for Ludovico's court. The full-scale clay model was built, the bronze was never poured, and the French army used the model for target practice when they took Milan in 1999. The anatomical treatise, the treatise on water, the treatise on painting which his apprentices partially assembled after his death from the notebooks, and which is the closest thing to a finished book he left. He was not lazy, he was not disorganized in any ordinary sense. He was a person for whom the investigation was more compelling than the product, the question more alive than the answer, and for whom the completion of one thing was always in competition with the beginning of the next inquiry that the first one had generated. He did not finish the anatomical treatise because the anatomy kept revealing new questions that the treatise could not wait for. He did not finish the Battle of Anghiari because the technique he had chosen to enable the investigation he wanted to conduct failed in a way that required beginning again, and beginning again was less interesting than the next question. He wrote in one of his notebooks, "I have wasted my hours." He wrote this about himself. It was the self-judgment of a man who understood perfectly well the gap between what he had investigated and what he had delivered. He felt it. He was not at peace with it in any simple sense, and he kept going, kept asking, kept investigating, kept beginning the next thing, because the alternative, the life organized around the completion of what had been started, was not the life his mind was built to live. What is the philosophy that Leonardo's life embodies? Because he did not write it down in the form of a treatise, and the irony of this is obvious. He left it in the practice, in the notebooks, in the record of a mind that treated every question as worthy of the full weight of its attention, and treated no answer as so complete that the question was fully closed. The first principle is what we might call the primacy of observation. Leonardo's notebooks begin again and again with the instruction to look, not to theorize, not to read the authorities, not to consult the tradition, to look. He distrusted received knowledge with the specific, productive skepticism of a person who had found repeatedly that looking carefully at the thing itself revealed details that no authority had mentioned. He dissected the human eye when the received anatomy was wrong about the eye. He watched water in channels and streams and floods when the received hydraulics failed to account for what the water actually did. He looked at birds when the received physics of flight did not explain how birds actually flew. The instruction to look is not passive. It is the most demanding form of attention available, the attention that is willing to be surprised, that does not know in advance what it will find, that stays with the thing long enough that the thing begins to reveal itself in ways that the glancing attention misses. This is what the notebooks record, not conclusions, but the process of arriving at them, the question, the observation, the sketch, the revised sketch, the further question that the revised sketch generated, the life of the inquiry captured in the making rather than the finished product that the inquiry was supposed to produce.
The second principle is the tolerance for incompleteness, not the celebration of it. Leonardo clearly wished for more time, more hands, more hours, but the acceptance of it as the necessary condition of a life organized around genuine curiosity. The genuinely curious life will always generate more questions than it can answer. The genuinely curious person will always begin more investigations than any single lifespan can complete. This is not a flaw. It is the signature of a mind that is alive to the world in the full, unmanaged, inexhaustible way that genuine curiosity requires. The third principle, and this is the most important one for the person in midlife taking the inventory of the unfinished, is that the value of an investigation is not located entirely in its completion. The anatomical drawings that were not organized into a treatise still changed how Leonardo painted bodies, and the paintings changed how the tradition painted bodies, and the tradition changed how all subsequent artists painted bodies. The flying machine designs that were never built were working out physical principles that later engineers would need. The water studies that never became a treatise informed his understanding of how paint moved, how cloth folded, how hair flowed, everything, because everything for Leonardo was connected to everything else. And the investigation that did not produce its intended product almost always fed into something else in ways that neither Leonardo nor anyone watching him could have predicted. The unfinished life is not the failed one. It is the one that was genuinely, fully, recklessly alive to the world, that kept asking when it should have been summarizing, that kept looking when it should have been concluding, that kept beginning because the beginning is where the aliveness lives. Now the bridge. Because Leonardo was a 15th and 16th century Florentine artist and polymath with access to the courts of Milan and France, and most people watching this video are not Renaissance polymaths with royal patrons. But here is what translates directly. The notebook you started and did not finish. The skill you began learning and then gave way to something else. The project that generated 10 more projects before it was done, leaving behind the trail of beginnings that midlife self-assessment keeps returning to as evidence of a problem. The curiosity that moves faster than any life can follow, and that has been, for this reason, producing more beginnings than endings for as long as you can remember. Leonardo is not offering you permission to avoid completion. He was not opposed to completion. He wanted to complete things. He felt the weight of the unfinished. He is offering you a reframe of what the weight means. The trail of beginnings is not a character defect. It is the record of a mind that has been alive to the world, that has encountered things and been genuinely interested in them, that has asked questions and followed them, that has moved through the world the way his water moved through the Tuscan landscape, finding every channel, filling every space, going wherever the inquiry led. And the question he is asking you, quietly from the notebooks, from the unfinished paintings, from the 28,000 pages of the life of a mind that never stopped asking, is not, why haven't you finished? It is, are you still asking? Are you still genuinely, recklessly, productively interested? Is the curiosity still alive, in the body, in the engagement with the world, in the willingness to begin something today that you may not finish this year or this decade, but that is pulling your attention because something in it is genuinely, irreplaceably interesting? If it is, the unfinished is not the evidence of failure. It is the evidence that the asking is still happening. And the asking, Leonardo's notebooks insist across 10,000 pages, is the thing. Here is what Leonardo da Vinci asks of you, practically, today.
First, take the inventory differently. Not the inventory of what you have not finished, the inventory of what your curiosity has touched, the subjects you have investigated, the skills you have begun, the questions you have genuinely pursued, not to completion, but with the full weight of your attention for the time that you gave them. This is the Leonardo inventory, not the ledger of deliverables, the map of where the mind has been alive. Notice what the map reveals about the shape of your curiosity, what it returns to, what threads run through the apparently unrelated beginnings, what you are in the accumulated record of what has genuinely interested you actually investigating, even if the investigation has no name yet, even if it has not produced a product, even if no institution has recognized it as a legitimate pursuit. Leonardo did not know he was building a unified investigation of the physics of movement. He was separately interested in water, birds, hair, cloth, muscles, and machines. The unified investigation is visible only from the outside, in retrospect, in the notebooks. Your unified investigation may be similarly invisible to you from inside it. The inventory done differently, as a map of genuine interest rather than a ledger of failures, may reveal it. Second, begin something you cannot finish. This is the Leonardo instruction and the most countercultural thing he offers. Find something that is genuinely interesting to you, that pulls your attention, that you do not already know how to do, that will take longer than you can currently see, and begin it. Not with the goal of finishing, with the goal of the quality of attention that the beginning produces, with the specific Leonardian intention of entering the investigation fully enough that the investigation begins to reveal itself, to show you its depths, its connections, its surprises, in the way that only the full, committed, no guarantee of completion entry into something can. The painting you will not be good at, the instrument you will not master, the language you will not become fluent in, the field of knowledge you are beginning too late by the culture's timeline to become an expert in. Begin it anyway. Begin it for the quality of attention it produces. Begin it for what the beginning reveals that no amount of reading about it in advance could reveal. Begin it as Leonardo began things, with the specific, patient, endlessly curious attention of a person who is interested in the world and is willing to start in order to find out what it contains. Third, write one question you cannot answer. Not the question you already know the answer to, not the question that your existing knowledge and expertise can address. The question at the edge of what you understand, the one that the things you have been investigating have generated but not resolved, that sits at the threshold of what you know and what you don't, that would require more investigation than you currently have time for and that you have therefore been putting aside. Write it down, in the Leonardo spirit, not to answer it, but to know that it is there, to honor it as the genuinely open question that it is, to give it the dignity of being named so that the part of your mind that has been generating the question in the background can know that you have received it and that you take it seriously, even if the treatise that would address it will never be written.
This is what the notebooks are, not answers, questions taken seriously, written down, given the full weight of the attention of a man who understood that the question is never smaller than the answer, that the asking is itself a form of knowing, that the genuine inquiry is its own kind of accomplishment, regardless of whether the product ever arrives. Fourth, give your curiosity permission to be impractical. Leonardo's most commercially successful work was the commissions he completed for his patrons, the portraits, the altarpieces, the decorative schemes that paid for the life that allowed him to do everything else. His most important work, measured by what it contributed to human knowledge, was the investigations he conducted for no patron at all. The anatomy was not commissioned. Nobody paid him to dissect 60 corpses and draw what he found. The water studies were not commissioned. Nobody paid him to spend years watching rivers. The flying machines were not commissioned. Nobody asked him to design them. He did them because he was interested, because the curiosity demanded it, because the question was there, and he was constitutionally incapable of standing in front of a genuine question and not at least beginning to investigate it. Give that to yourself. The investigation that has no patron, no deadline, no product that anyone is waiting for, no justification in terms of the career or the income or the useful skill that the time might otherwise develop. The thing that is interesting to you for no reason that the productivity framework would recognize as sufficient. It may lead nowhere that the productivity framework can measure. It led, in Leonardo's case, to 28,000 pages of the most extraordinary mind in Western civilization, doing what minds are for. The leading nowhere is not the evidence that it was wrong to go. It is the evidence that you were following the curiosity honestly, which is the only way the curiosity can lead you anywhere worth going. I want to close with the image I keep returning to when I think about Leonardo. Not the Mona Lisa, not the Last Supper, not the flying machines or the anatomical drawings or the hydraulic canals. The old man in Ambos, 67 years old, the right hand that can no longer hold a brush steadily. The 3 paintings in the studio that he has been working on for years and that he will not finish. The notebooks around him, 10,000 pages of the life of a mind that never stopped asking. Or rather, that could not stop, that was constitutionally incapable of encountering the world without being interested in it, without wanting to look more carefully, without generating the next question before the current one was fully answered. He said he had wasted his hours. He felt the weight of the unfinished. He was not at peace with it in any simple sense. And then he kept going. Not because the guilt was insufficient to stop him, because the curiosity was more fundamental than the guilt, because the question was there, the next question, the new channel, the thing he had noticed that nobody else had noticed yet, and the question was more alive than the judgment, and the life organized around the asking was the only life available to the kind of mind he was. He left the paintings unfinished. He left the notebooks incomplete. He left behind the most extraordinary record of human curiosity that Western civilization has produced. Not the finished work, the asking. The 10,000 pages of a mind that was genuinely, fully, inexhaustibly alive to the world it was moving through. That is the life. That is the accomplishment. And the fact that it was not finished is not evidence against it. It is the evidence of it. Here is the question Leonardo da Vinci leaves us with today. Not from the studio in Amboise, not from the notebooks or the paintings or the designs for machines he never built. From the asking. From the specific, daily, entirely personal quality of attention that he brought to every question the world put in front of him. Are you still asking? Not performing the asking, not accumulating the vocabulary of the curious person, not reading about things at the distance that reading allows. Actually asking. Standing in front of something genuinely interesting and wanting, with the full weight of your available attention, to know what it contains. And is there something, right now, in the life you are actually living, that is pulling your attention not because it is useful or practical or the kind of thing a person of your age and experience is supposed to be interested in, but because it is genuinely, inexplicably, Leonardo-style interesting to you? Begin it, not to finish it, to find out what it contains. To give the curiosity the respect of the actual investigation, rather than the managed distance of the person who is interested in things, but too careful about completion to risk the beginning. Leave that in the comments. The thing that is genuinely interesting to you right now, the question you cannot answer, the investigation you have not begun, the unfinished thing that is still pulling. Because naming it is the beginning of the notebook. And the notebook, Leonardo's 10,000 pages insist, is the thing. I'll see you in the next one.